Every one of them tells a story.
In a sense, it almost becomes a sort of mythical thing.
I find it very compelling to see wood which has been discarded, which has had a life, and somehow that life is seen as ended, or that usefulness is gone, and it's been chucked in the skip, or it's been chucked at the side of the road as fly tipping, or it's been neglected and forgotten about. I then feel compelled to somehow give it a new life or do something with it. In the way that I wouldn't if it was a lovely piece of rosewood or walnut or Cuban mahogany or something, which had this inherent quality to the material. But the interest for me is much more in the history that has been imposed in the wood as well. So you have a combination of the weathering in the wood, the evidence of human traffic on it, of handling, of old locks where screws have been, and with paint, with that weathering of paint, and the combination between all these things, and the active influence of light on it, which can fade the colours and bring out other things. And all this comes together to create a surface which is really the start of what inspires me. If I was a painter, I could entirely dictate on the canvas what I wanted, whereas if I'm working with salvage material, I'm dictated to by the restrictions of the dimensions of the piece. And it's that tension between what you want to impose on something and what it's screaming at you not to do or to do. It's that exchange which is, I think, part the sort of hub of the creative process. I wasn't formally trained in colour, so I tend to use colour in a much more intuitive way. When I start with lighter palettes, I suppose I'm thinking of tones much more than colour. I don't use colour in the same way that a painter would, where they think in terms of colour pushing things forward or back. What works for me is laying the objects on the ground, looking at them and playing with them, and that is essentially my sketching. And the great thing is you have a great sense of freedom because you're not making any mistakes, you're not committing to something. If you're just placing things on the floor, you can constantly change them. Almost too many possibilities at times because you have an infinity of things you can do with it. And it's making these decisions about which direction you're going to go in that's the hard bit. I think the process itself is so evident in the final piece because you see where all the joins are, you see where one piece of wood has a relationship with another. And it's, what is that relationship? Is it a hard edge? Is it something that bleeds into it more softly? It's not always about harmony. Sometimes clashing, a bit of disharmony can feel, but I tend to respond emotionally. So if I feel something looks like something does something for me, it's almost a physical thing. Then it works rather than maybe following a logic. It's something which I wait to see how the colours, how the textures sing.
My name is KATY Bridgestock and I'm a photographer and artist, and this is a short film about how I made my artwork entitled Mrs. Goram Goes for an Ice Cream, which was shortlisted for the Scottish Landscape Awards. I bought my first SLR camera 10 years ago when I moved to Scotland as a way to explore my new home and encourage me to visit new and different places. For the last 18 years, I've worked as a housing officer, and as my photography has developed, my interest in people and community has become a common theme throughout my work. At the start of the pandemic, I was feeling quite sad about not having any new people to photograph, so I bought a job lot of miniature people off the internet. Some of the miniature people started to really live in my imagination, and these photographs are of Morag, who featured heavily in my photography during the pandemic. Morag has left her home way up in the Highlands and set off looking for adventure with all of her belongings in 2 large bags. As I couldn't go out anywhere due to the pandemic, I decided to recreate some of my favourite Glasgow buildings for some of my tiny people to inhabit. The first building I created was the Lauriston Bar. I had arranged to have a portrait shoot there with some friends on the day the pubs were ordered to close, and I was sad to have cancelled this and instead decided to recreate the pub myself. I enjoyed this process so much that I then went on to create miniature versions of the Alison Arms and Heritage Bar, which formed the Southside Pub trilogy. More recently, I've been creating some of the older cafes around Glasgow, which led me to Glasgow's oldest chippy, the Val d'Aro. I start my process by photographing the building and then drawing it out to the correct scale. The model is then created using bits of the photograph and hand-drawn elements in a collage. It then usually takes me a few attempts to get a shot of it that I'm happy with. During the pandemic, my tiny models were photographed at home, but I took this one to the cafe to try a few different shots before settling on this final shot from outside the cafe, with the lights of the busy traffic of Glasgow Cross forming the background.
I'm Becky Little. I'm an artist and a builder, and currently I'm working on Earthbound Orkney, which is a project about using the subsoils of Orkney to create an exhibition about artefacts that come from place. We have this beautiful range of subsoils in Orkney, many different colours, textures, and what's inside those soils varies depending on the rock that they're coming from, the way the geology is weathered down from the rock into the soils. And then we have these different particles. We always have some clay, and clay is the tiny particle that glues the subsoil together like this. The cubes are made of rammed earth. That's taking just literally subsoil, breaking it down a little bit. And that's basically what rammed earth is. It's just damp soil compacted together. And many of the old buildings on Orkney, the Neolithic buildings for instance, have compacted soil within the walls. Right at the heart of everything that I do is about place. So that's place being place in space and place in time. We've got the deep time, grand scales where landscapes are created, and then we've got this hyperlocal scale where materials change, in very small scales. And I think my art in particular plays with all those scales in the process. Each cube, it's partly my emotional response, it's partly about the visual way that these soils appear in the landscape, and then of course it's about the history and the way processes have created specific things in specific places. So the other part of the artefact is the polished clay ball, and it's to show the way you can shine clay. We're going to have these polished clay balls alongside some Neolithic ones that we find in the excavations on various Neolithic sites in Orkney. So we get to a point where we've made a wet ball, and then we roughly shape it, and then as these balls dry, and once they're quite firm but still a little bit workable, that's when I start to use these polishing tools, which are either egg cups or small herb jars. So you're shaping really. I suppose there's that thing about climate change and erosion, and a lot of these are coastal soils coming from places where the water is encroaching and wind and weather is getting more wild, and all these kind of narratives are being woven into something quite small and intimate. It is dirt, and we're making treasure from it. And as soon as you make treasure from dirt, it's not dirt anymore, it's something more precious and something that you're going to look after.
Yeah, I think sometimes when artists write or talk about their work, the magic can leave the room quite quickly. But I think still in context of this painting, it grew from a body of work I did in the north coast of Iceland, a small island called Herisi in 2022. I think this painting has a slightly otherworldly feel to it. Is it the moon we're looking at, or is it Earthrise? Earthrise was the title given to a famous photo taken in 1968 by the Apollo 8 mission. And it was the first time really that we, the human race, had looked the planet in that way and seen how frail and fragile it was. It was a truly objective viewpoint. There's also sort of strangeness about the painting. Sometimes we talk as though everything out there is strange, but it's us who are strange, I think. The bewildering complexity of our existence is strange. So I think the painting, I try and capture something of that, the strangeness of our existence. There's also a whale sneaked into the painting somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it came from. I don't paint whales normally. But on the east side of the island was an area where whales, you could hear whales but not see them. And I think that sort of seeped into the work. I like the sense of a sort of huge presence that was there but I couldn't see it. And I think that's how it is for us. What we see in here is just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's someone or something far greater behind and through it all. And I think that good art and good landscape paintings should acknowledge and sometimes reflect that. In a seemingly cold, hostile, objective universe, I think it's amazing that we alone see the natural world in a sort of subjective, emotional way. And that's strange. And it's really the source of all my work, and it's certainly the source in particular of this painting.
My name is Holger Mohaupt. I'm an artist based in East Lothian, on the east coast of Scotland. I work in photography, film, site-specific installation, and sound. As part of my research and my practice, I use my bicycle a lot. I'm interested in the way we navigate place, particularly landscape. Recent work included art cycles, which are curated cycle rides where I take groups of people on set paths through the city or a semi-rural landscape. En route to those cycles, we stop for talks related to heritage or a specific location and its architecture. For the work Crosstown, which is a film portrait of Manhattan, filmed with a 360 immersive camera, I cycled along 42nd Street from Turtle Bay in the east to Hell's Kitchen on the western shores of the Hudson River. The journey starts at the United Nations building and cuts right through the cultural and political heart of New York. The Theatre District, Times Square, Grand Central Station and the New York Library. The cycle ride took place on the 4th of July, the American Independence Day, which, according to the waiter in the local diner, is the quietest day of the year in New York.
I paint landscape, I paint still life. I think of myself probably more as a portrait painter, to be honest, but I do a fair amount of landscape work. Those generally tend to start outdoors. I'll do field studies on location. I'll take photographs at the same time, take them back to the studio and then develop them and work them up into larger paintings. Sometimes there's a fair bit of reworking that goes into it. Take what you get from the field and make it into something that works pictorially. The thing about landscape painting is that you can't arrange the picture before you start. What you'll have to do is to take the elements that you see in nature, bend them a little, rearrange them, create something that works as a picture as opposed to just a snapshot of what you see outside. I call myself an impressionist, and whether I'm using that word in the way that others would use it, I don't know. Really, to me, impressionism is a kind of approach to painting or an approach to seeing, I begin by looking at the pattern of light, reproduce and interpret that in a kind of poetic way through my paintings. And then ultimately, you know, the more you develop that representation of the light pattern, the form will naturally and kind of unavoidably emerge. It's a kind of parallel for the way that we actually see and perceive the world. The painting is called Little Sister, and the genesis of it came about after a family trip to North Berwick last year. This little town has 1,000,001 paintings in it waiting to be made, produced a number of small field studies. If I've done some studies in the location on a similar kind of day, then I have that sense of what it felt like to be there, which I think is really important, because I want to get that across in the picture. It's not just a case of here's what this looked like. I want the viewer hopefully to have a sense of what it felt like to be there and to look at that with my eyes. I was kind of drawn to the rock in the foreground on the beach and then Bass Rock in the background being shown together and trying to suggest a familial relationship between the two. So the title Little Sister actually isn't about the kids climbing on the rock, it's the rock itself. And I was kind of imagining that rock on the beach as a younger sibling to Bass Rock in the background. I'm always fascinated by the way that we interact with the landscape, and I guess I'm sort of drawn to that contrast between that very transient presence of people, the short nature of our lives, the way that we hang around for a little while and then we're gone, but how that contrasts with the ancient landscape that nurtures us and that we inhabit. I like the idea of drawing a parallel between, you know, the families enjoying the beach and thinking of these features of the landscape as families as well. So that was kind of the genesis of it. The painting itself was constructed from multiple different photographs in the end. All of the different figures that are situated around, they've all been sort of selected from different places and placed where I felt that they worked, and created a kind of flow of the viewer's eye around the picture.
All my work involves the unconscious, and I deliberately try not to think of what something is going to mean or why I'm doing it. The meaning, if it comes later. It's the unlikely and the unexpected is what I want from the work. This is a sculpture called Taurus. I found this branch and I cut it off a down beech tree. One piece was cast, then the second piece was cast and then reversed and joined together. In a sense, it almost becomes a sort of mythical thing. There's a tension between nature and the objects I use, but also it's a celebration of nature and what it's willing and able to do. The tension is going on over a long period of time, maybe 150 years, before anything that I've suggested might happen will happen. It's an idiotic project, and idiocy and art go together quite often, I think. The torus is a mathematical term, but I like that link because it has a hole in the middle like a donut, but I like the irregularity of it. Part of the excitement of the work is the fact of not knowing why I'm actually making it. I know by that sense within me that one piece is a good piece. For my purposes, I need to know more. That's enough, and I choose not to question why I'm doing it. I think people will recognize it as a natural form, and they don't really understand where it's come from. I'm quite happy for people not to really quite understand how it was created.
Hi, I'm Roxy Russell, the artist behind Hanging by a Thread. This installation features a wooden and metal frame with 233 hanging embroideries, each one representing a flowering plant from the Scottish Biodiversity List. These are species considered vulnerable and in need of conservation. Out of around 2,000 flowering plants in Scotland, 233 are at risk. I use free motion embroidery. It's like drawing with a sewing machine. I start by researching each plant's shape, color, and size, then stitch it with cotton thread onto a water-soluble plant-based fabric. And after rinsing, I'm left with just the threads. Some embroideries are intricate and take longer, others are simpler. But every one of them tells a story. Some plants, like the twin flower, have been rescued from extinction. Others, like the Scottish primrose, only grow in Scotland. The fragility of the threads reflects the vulnerability of these plants. The way they hang close together, suspended at different heights, invites you to come in closer and look more carefully. We often experience what's called plant blindness. We walk through nature and notice other animals, but not necessarily the individual plants. Our brain blurs the green together. It's part of how we've become disconnected from the natural world. Hanging by a thread is about making these vulnerable species visible, giving them space, attention, and a voice in the conversation around biodiversity.
I began photographing landscapes as a way to engage with the natural environment. Days out in the mountains, exploring the lochs and glens, weather, light, traditional landscape photography. With the addition of a drone, I was able to change perspective, capture images previously out of reach. Looking straight down, I discovered patterns and textures, along with signs of human activity, old and new. Then came the lockdowns, restricting everyone to their local area. For me, this was rural Perthshire, so I began photographing the surrounding fields, looking for geometry, finding minimalism, and patterns within the changing seasons. On return to the hills, the landscape looked different. Where I'd previously seen natural landscapes, I now saw the mark of human activity everywhere. I realised my photography was not showing what I was seeing, that traditional landscape photography was only telling part of the story. I began pairing aerial landscapes with a straight down view at the same location. Together, they seemed to give a more complete picture. They spoke of land use rather than landscapes, the changing demand for resources, of energy and leisure, of habitats managed for sport, conflicting pressures on the land, along with signs of regeneration, revealing what lies beneath.
Hi, my name is Kirsten and the work I'm presenting is an ode on St Kilda, an analogue printed stop motion film. For those unfamiliar, St Kilda is a remote archipelago of the west of Scotland, and my film focuses on the main island, Herta, and the resilient community that once lived there. To create the visuals, I used the collagraph printing technique of cutting and scoring mapboard plates, then making multiple prints for each frame of the stop motion sequence. This method helped evoke the textured historical feeling I was aiming for. I've been fascinated by St Kilda since I was young, and I eventually was able to visit and document the island itself. This film aims to portray the unique customs and daily lives of St Kildians. Inspired by the 19th century travel films of St Kilda, I wanted to bring their world to life and the unforgiving terrain that surrounded them. Sound and storytelling were also very important. I incorporated an excerpt from William Collins's collection of poems, an ode on the popular superstitions of the Highlands of Scotland, recorded in the style of traditional oral storytelling, reminiscent of tales shared by fireside. This helped create a natural narrative flow, with imagery guiding the viewer around Herta from an aerial perspective. This piece is part of my larger collection exploring St Kilda's life and legacy, and I hope it allows you to connect with the remarkable place and its history.
My name is Cully. I'm an artist based in Perthshire, Scotland. I work as a maker and curator through multimedia formats. Much of my art includes words. These explore the process by which a thought, idea, image or space is made visible between the artist and the audience. As well as using words in my work, I often use my surrounding landscape as a medium, and sometimes I combine them both. I've lived in the Carse of Gowrie for 24 years, and over the years I've seen adaptations and changes to farming traditions. I've noticed how efficient techniques and machinery have superseded human endeavour and community to gain quicker rewards. Notably, many of the workers are now migrants rather than those who have grown up in the area. At harvest time, I'm surrounded by fields of hay bales that sit as monumental sculptures in their own right. I'm sure if people saw me making my field interventions, they might question what I was up to, or perhaps want to chase me out of their field. Essentially, I'm trying to make the most of the natural materials in the landscape that are available. Conceptually, making my film for the Scottish Landscape Awards helped me contemplate changing times and consider human responsibility for nurturing the earth sustainably. My intention was to put myself through exertive, laborious acts, echoing the myths of Sisyphus and Prometheus, where a human body is bound within an endlessly repeating system. So what you see in many of my films is both a humorous and distressing motif of a person caught in a struggle to reach a destination or fulfill a purpose.
I start my process with local walks to capture my reference image. Then in my studio, using a permanent marker, I do a freehand drawing of my reference on my lino, which can take up to 2 days. I then carve into the surface of the lino to create my first layer. I normally work in 4 layers using the reduction process and treating each layer as tones, building from light to dark. I use oil-based inks and hand mix my own colors on a glass sheet from the 3 primaries, white and an extender. I work different to most lino cutters, as I use quite a few colors per layer using the Japanese technique of the gradient roll, selectively rolling my inks using my small rollers almost like paintbrushes. In between each layer carved, all the paper in the limited edition of 10 gets another layer of ink by passing it through the printing press. I'm also inspired by the loose mark making of the Impressionists and how these marks can become what the human eye and brain reads as realism. For me, the reduction process is like a song or a piece of theatre that has a start and a finish as the block is destroyed in the process, never to be printed again.
Weather Eye is part of a wider project called Emergency, exploring ways to relate to emergencies from glacial ice loss. It's 2 tiny glass watch faces, painted with images of glacial environments I visited while working with glacial archaeologists in Switzerland in 2023. The glacial flour is fine rock powder that is made by the action of a glacier moving over rock over centuries, scouring it down. When the glacier melts, this fine powder is left behind. And I realised that, like the glacial archaeology, this is something else that is in appearance from ice as it retreats. And I began to collect it for drawing. First, I make a watercolour using the ground sediment, and then I paint this glacial flour onto the glass. After it is dried, I work into the surface with an etching needle, scoring away the fine rock powder to leave a negative space drawing depicting some of the environments where I gathered the flour. A bit like a stencil, it selectively let light through to cast a shadowy image of the mountain landscape that is drawn on the glass. It's like the shadow is the ghost of the landscape, which seems appropriate given that these images of the glacial sites are already views of the past.
Colours in the paint. The colours in the paint.
So people see your work. How does that make you feel?
Happy. You're happy good. Happy good.
My name is Cashlyn Mackenzie and I am a Gaelic-speaking multidisciplinary artist and experimental musician. I primarily work across installation, performance and film. My work explores themes relating to capitalism's impact on nature and the human psyche. I like to shift between different perspectives, from the micro to the macro, and through the lens of different beings in the ecosystem. I experiment with time to discover new worlds by speeding up interactions under the microscope, creating time lapses, and by filming subjects in slow motion. I like to play with light and the viewer's subjective understanding of space, to reveal hidden perspectives and to create illusions. In my work, I like to juxtapose archival field recordings and footage with contemporary recordings. My heritage is from the Isle of Skye, and my recent practice has drawn a lot of inspiration from Tupper and Dulchus, an online oral archive dedicated to preserving and promoting Scottish oral culture with field recordings from the 60s until the present day, documenting everything from songs, stories, folklore, poems, idioms and factual information in Gaelic, Scots and English. I have been particularly drawn to their Gaelic recordings, notably those of my great-grandfather, wherein he speaks on the folklore surrounding health wells and springs, and also to recordings relating to herbology, wherein all the medical uses of local plants are described. I come from a traditional music background and play the whistle and flute. As a child, I dreamed of learning to communicate with birds through the penny whistle. My short film selected for the Scottish Landscape Awards, A Smeorach sa Bhatín Hiún, The Song Thrush in the Morning, follows a disagreement between a whistle player and a song thrush. The film collages animation, green screen and footage with comic effects. It begins with an animated landscape time-lapse set over a period of 1,000 years to the present day. The viewer bears witness to a drastic change in the appearance of the landscape due to human activities such as deforestation and agriculture. In the second half of the film, a song thrush is seen chirping over the land on the last remaining native tree in the scene. The song thrush is warning the viewer to leave their tree alone, while the whistle player imitates the bird's calls, unwittingly telling the bird to leave the tree in response. Unaware that a warning has been issued, the human is oblivious to the rage of the bird and thinks it is being cute. I see this interaction as an extended metaphor for a long-developed misalignment with nature and our given ecosystem. This film marks the beginning of a larger audiovisual project focused on wind, birds and woodwind, where I am composing music from birdsong and learning to play it on the whistle and flute.
I joined the print studio I think in 1978 or 79, and the main reason was to get access to the facilities and to be amongst other people who were making at the same time, because normally I'm making on my own, and because I'm working digitally, this is very convenient that I can do, let's say 60% of the work and then come here and refine the work. So I've been working really up through my adult career with printmaking, and only come back to it really more seriously in the last 10 years. And the print studio was one place that actually was a gentle enabler to allow me to come back and do that. I started working on digital media because it allowed me to combine photography, drawing, painting, and I can manipulate all of those things together as a kind of assemblage. And I find it a great hybrid of methods and processes. This work is called Rough Round the Edges, and that's a little bit of Glasgow in there, because people talk about being rough around the edges. It can be a less than complimentary term, but it also can refer to the edges of the print, even to the edges of the paper. The ideas behind the print are a kind of homage to tradespeople, which is very much what built Glasgow. Unfortunately, shipbuilding, engineering and so on are very much in decline. My father was a joiner, and years ago I inherited his toolbox, took lots of photographs of it, made sketches, and thought I must do something with them. And years later I started looking at them again and thinking about the way that they could perhaps tell stories. Although they're inanimate objects, there's evidence they've been used. So there's a person, there's a trade, there's a culture, there's a history, there's a tradition behind those works.
Hi, I'm Leslie and DERKS. This is Grangemouth, the town where I live and grew up. It has had a huge impact on my art. Even as a child, I was fascinated with the lights of the petrochemical plant at night. When friends visited, my dad would take us to see the lights, which looked like fairy lights. Despite some thinking Grangemouth is unattractive, I loved the transformation from day to night. While at art school, Grangemouth was a recurrent theme in my work, which was more abstract then. I would choose small sections of photographs I took and enlarge the image onto huge canvases, using enamels and oils to create the glow of the flames. After graduating from Glasgow School of Art, I continued to paint it for about 5 years before shifting my focus to cityscapes. For the Landscape Awards, I wanted to return to paint Grangemouth, capturing numerous photographs before choosing one. Taken during winter, the chosen area is now more overgrown, but I loved how the light filtered through the trees, showing an abstract quality. This is Industrial Illumination, my entry for the awards. At the end of each day, I photographed the progress, which you can see in that series of images. I started on a black gesso background, and using tiny paintbrushes, I began building up the colour in oil paint. Regardless of scale of work, I always work with small paintbrushes. This allows me to achieve detail and to mix different nuances of colour and to get those subtle changes. Additionally, I incorporate a fast drying white into all my colour mixtures, which allows me to build up colour more efficiently. My studio in Larbert is my sanctuary, and it's where I spend most of my time. I'm so grateful to have had this space for nearly 23 years to work from.
I became an artist 25 years ago, and my work has always been about the environment and the landscape around me. And a lot of my work is based on journeys, mostly journeys around where I live and work, which has been in Scotland for the past 20 years. Well, Smithereens comprises of 42 ceramic fragments that were collected off the shores of North Berwick Beach. And these fragments, and they're from something called a pancheon bowl. And a pancheon bowl was an old ceramic bowl that was typically used in kitchens. And I specifically use the pancheon bowl fragments because they have quite a porous surface to them. The porous surface means that when I use Indian ink to draw onto the surface, that it is easily absorbed, and then in time, as it dries, it becomes permanent. So the pieces, each piece depicts a different landscape that I've experienced on journeys in and around East Lothian. So it sort of tells a story really of the landscape around where I live. I think increasingly the landscape has become more important, you know, with the sort of environmental changes that are happening. And with my work, I really want people to sort of stop and think about the landscape around them, and the fact that my work is often miniature helps to draw the viewer in.
My name's Valerie McLean. I'm a landscape artist and I work from my studio on the outskirts of Edinburgh. Surfing is one of my multi-panel pieces. More recently I've been working on a number of panels to make up an image. Surfing is a 2-panel piece, but sometimes I work in 3, even 4 panels. I do this because it gives me an opportunity to bring together different ways of working and different ways of experiencing and viewing a scene. So I like to bring together more abstract elements alongside more representational views of a particular landscape as well. I spent a lot of time playing in the woods beside our house when I was young, climbing trees, building dens, and I have a real affinity for that kind of environment and I enjoy experiencing it in all seasons. I'm very interested in the diversity of forms, the complexity that you'll find, the difference that you'll find. I can see it's really important for a healthy environment or healthy societies that difference is encouraged. Diversity is so important. I'm also very interested in the movement of natural forms, so how a tree might grow, how it will bend and twist, or a blade of grass, how it will move, and that relates for me very much to a felt sense of being in my body. I love dancing and moving, and when I'm thinking about a painting or working on a painting, it's that sense of movement that I'm quite often trying to capture. I suppose a sense of that life force, of that energy that comes through and that gives the abundance of forms that you see when you walk through even a small patch of woods.
Hi, I'm Caroline and this is my studio on Skye. So I work with all different plants, but mostly it's the smaller, more unnoticed plants, often plants that people used to use in the past. This is an example of pear moss. This is a shawl made, it was made to go to Canada, thinking of the people in Canada and Nova Scotia. I've made rope string out of the hair moss and then looped it. So often my pieces are a repetitive traditional technique. So you're repeating the same action again and again. There's a sort of meditative, very slow pace of working, but you get these sort of very small changes which give the piece its character. And I like exploring the balance between the fragility and strength of work and the plants and the technique and how far you can push something. So this piece that's in this exhibition is called What Have We Done? And it's all made from plants, and I've embroidered texts, scientific facts onto linen, and I've made the thread that I've embroidered using these different plants. So for instance, this is a very thin thread that I made from the hair moss. This is lime bast. So lime bast is really strong and you can make it really fine, and people used to use that a lot in the past for all sorts of things. So there's nettle, flax, soft rush, lime bast, willow bark. The whole piece is on linen and then it's dyed, and this piece highlights specific facts which I think are really shocking, and I wanted to just have them as stark and bare.
My name is V. Thompson and I'm an artist living in the northeast of Scotland. I see my work as self-portraits describing my relationship with my surroundings and the things that draw my attention. I do not feature in any of my visual work, as I want what I convey to reflect the sentiments I feel when I am there. The drawing, shortlisted for the Scottish Landscape Award, is in pen and ink and depicts the power of the wind as it roars through a group of trees, telling the story of the movement as it progresses across the canopy. There is a narrative in the energy as it moves across the landscape and through the trees, and then continues its onward journey in that fluid and ever-changing rhythm. It is the power of the natural on small and large scales. My drawings and paintings narrate changing seasons over days and years as I encounter the same spaces each time I walk, run or swim. There is a meditative aspect to producing these drawings. They are created in a very calm space as I work from memory, where I drift and gently make across the page, recalling these beautiful fluid patterns. It is my way of respectfully taking my space and my fluid existence in the world around me. These ink drawings explore the little movements and day-to-day spaces, offering insight into the joy I find in witnessing the movement of light and energy, reliving something I experience as joyful and powerful.
I'd never really considered myself as a landscape painter until my painting of the Linwood battery plant fire was shortlisted. Although I've painted for most of my life, my interest in landscape painting, and specifically in painting skies, really coincided with my work as an ocularist, making and fitting artificial eyes. I think that having to focus in paintings tiny details such as irises during the day really made me in my own time want to look outwards and upwards, painting skies and large canvases using big brushes and lots of energy. Much like the eyes I make in the west of Scotland, most of the skies I make are of a similar blue-grey palette. And although I'm actually particularly fond of painting overcast Scottish skies, when I saw those billowing pink clouds last year in the Linwood battery plant fire, for some reason it immediately reminded me of a Tiepolo painting of the Immaculate Conception that I'd seen during a residency in the Prado back in 2012. Although the sketch I made during that trip has unfortunately been destroyed since then, as soon as I saw those pink clouds, it immediately reminded me of that painting, and I was really interested to investigate that relationship between this 18th century painting and those pink clouds caused by the burning lithium chloride in the batteries. What that link was between the ethereal and the toxic. Much like when a sunset is enhanced by pollution clouds, which then brought me back to the Tiepolo painting and the serpent under Mary's foot. I think that most of the artists who are being shown in this exhibition have quite a long-standing relationship with their subject matter, but I really see this as a kind of beginning of my relationship with this subject matter, and going forward, I really want to explore it more.
Hi, my name is ANDREY CHUGUNOV. I'm a conceptual artist based in East Kilbride, working at the intersection of digital and analog electronic media. My practice revolves around spatial installations that unfold over time, combining sound, light, data, algorithms, printing, and ready-mades. I explore themes of mortality, temporality, and memory decay through minimal process-based works. The project selected for the Scottish Landscape Award exhibition is titled A Space for Encapsulation. It began after I moved to Scotland 3 years ago. That first winter I lived in Saltcoats, where I walked the coastline daily, from the Crossing Harbour to the dunes near Stevenston. There I witnessed a striking overlap of temporalities, lichen and moss-covered harbour walls from the industrial era, crumbling 20th century bathing ponds and pristine dunes. At the shoreline, seaweed, jellyfish and fishing nets were tangled with plastic and other debris. It was hard to tell what was natural and what was made. They had already begun to merge, and I became fascinated by this process of how nature reclaims human traces. Over the next 2 years, I traveled along the Scottish coast, from fishing towns and working ports to ruined harbours and ancient caves, documenting science, collecting artifacts and recording sound. I use photogrammetry to make 3D scans of found artifacts, buildings and structures, rusted, softened and warped by sand, salt and wind, covered with lichen, seaweed and shells. I didn't try to clean up the scans digitally. Instead, I preserved the glitches, holes and splashes, letting the scanning process itself reflect the erosion of memory and presenting a resistance of physical matter to digitalization. The result is 41-minute film composed of 1-minute video essays. Each presents a flyby of a floating 3D artifact in a digital space. accompanied by generative soundscape and poetic commentaries. The sound blends field recordings, machine-generated coastal textures, and solved digital glitches. Coastlines are thresholds in the beginning of terrestrial life, and with the rising sea level possibly its end. This project reflects on how artifacts dissolve, how history slips out of time, and how landscapes absorb memory. A space for encapsulation is not an archive, it's a radical witnessing in the face of the common global disaster. It's a meditation on disappearance.
Some places are special. They belong to us all. They exist beyond the lines that we draw on a map or dispute regarding their ownership and control on a document. They are distinctive and distinguished from others. Their impact is not local or even national, but their presence is felt on a global scale. We know that the world is in a critical moment with regard to its relationships with humanity, but it seems as if we are unable or unwilling to respond. Sometimes we are careless about places, seeing them as something to exploit for financial or other gain. We just care less and allow them to become meaningless. My work is about places that have been transformed by the actions of human beings. It is a journey between nature and nurture, and reflects upon the signposts that we observe whilst undertaking this journey. I work with visual representation, mostly photography and language, sometimes in the form of texts, in order to reveal and to immerse myself into and explore the psychological and cultural spaces that we have created, and to consider the dynamic and complex nature of landscapes, and to consider what they might mean for us in turn.